The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 60-story skyscraper as Victoria Montgomery clutched her swollen belly, 8 months pregnant and trembling, in the marble lobby of Sterling Heights Corporation, the multi-billion-dollar empire she'd built from nothing, though no one in this building knew it. Her husband of 3 years, Daniel Montgomery, stood 15 feet away in his crisp executive suit, his hand possessively wrapped around his mistress Jennifer's waist as he gestured sharply toward the security guards. Victoria had arrived unannounced, soaked from the downpour, her designer maternity dress clinging to her frame, hoping to surprise Daniel with the ultrasound photos tucked in her purse, the ones revealing they were having twins. Instead, she watched in disbelief as the man who'd promised her forever, the man whose child grew inside her, pointed directly at her with cold, unfamiliar eyes and commanded the uniformed guards to remove this homeless woman from his workplace. Jennifer's crimson lips curved into a cruel smile as she whispered something in Daniel's ear, and he nodded with such casual cruelty that Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The security team, her own employees, though they didn't recognize their actual CEO behind her exhausted appearance and rain-soaked hair, advanced toward her with apologetic but determined expressions. Victoria's mind raced through 3 years of careful deception, of hiding her true identity to test if Daniel loved her for herself rather than her fortune, of the shell companies and trusts that kept her name separate from Sterling Heights public records, of every sacrifice she'd made to protect her heart from gold diggers after her first disastrous marriage. Now, as the guard's hands reached for her arms, and Daniel turned away without a second glance, as Jennifer's laughter echoed through the lobby and the storm outside intensified, Victoria felt something shift inside her, not the babies, but something harder, colder, more dangerous. The woman who'd given up everything to play the role of a simple housewife was about to remind her husband exactly who owned every inch of the building he worked in, who signed his paychecks, who controlled his future with a single phone call. But how completely would his world shatter when he discovered the pregnant wife he'd just thrown into the rain controlled the very empire he'd been climbing for years? What would break first, his career, his relationship with his mistress, or the fragile delusion that he'd ever held any power in this marriage? And when Victoria revealed the truth, would her revenge be swift and public, or would she dismantle his life piece by calculated piece? The lightning split the sky the moment Victoria's shoulder hit the revolving door, and the thunder that followed seemed to shake the very foundations of Sterling Heights Corporation. But not as much as the revelation that was about to shake Daniel Montgomery's world. 3 years earlier, the beginning of everything, Victoria Chen had been different back then. Victoria Sterling Chen, if anyone had bothered to check the corporate records, buried under 7 layers of holding companies and offshore trusts. At 28, she'd already built a real estate empire that would make most moguls weep with envy, but the loneliness had become suffocating. Her first husband, Gregory, had married her for the Sterling fortune. She'd discovered him in bed with his personal trainer just 6 months after the wedding, already planning how to maximize his divorce settlement. The betrayal had taught her a lesson she'd sworn never to forget: hide the money, test the heart. So when she met Daniel Montgomery at a charity art auction, not one of her own company's events, but a small community fundraiser where she'd volunteered anonymously, she'd introduced herself simply as Victoria Chen, an independent art consultant. Daniel had been charming, attentive, seemingly unimpressed by wealth. He worked in commercial real estate, he'd explained, climbing the corporate ladder at a large firm. He had ambition but not greed, dreams but not delusions, or so she'd thought. Their courtship had been a fairy tale: coffee dates at corner cafes, walks through Central Park, movie nights in her modest apartment, the one she kept separate from her penthouse for exactly this purpose. Daniel had proposed after 18 months with his grandmother's ring. Not some ostentatious diamond, but a simple gold band with a small sapphire. Victoria had cried real tears, believing she'd finally found genuine love. They married in a small ceremony. Victoria wore off-white instead of pristine white. She'd been married before, after all, though she'd kept that detail vague. Daniel's family welcomed her warmly. His mother called her the daughter I always wanted. His father appreciated her down-to-earth sensibility. The irony was exquisite. 2 months after the wedding, Victoria had done something either brilliantly strategic or catastrophically stupid. She'd arranged for Daniel to be hired at Sterling Heights Corporation. Not directly, that would have raised questions. Instead, she'd had her actual CEO, Marcus Richardson, who knew her true identity, create an opening in the commercial development division and ensure Daniel's resume ended up at the top of the pile. Daniel had been ecstatic. Sterling Heights was one of the most prestigious real estate firms in the country. The salary was triple what he'd been making. The opportunities for advancement seemed limitless. "This is going to change everything for us," he'd told Victoria that night, spinning her around their small apartment. "We can finally start planning for the future. Maybe buy a real house, start a family." Victoria had smiled and kissed him, ignoring the small voice in her head that whispered, "You're playing with fire." She'd been right. Present day, the lobby. The security guard's hand closed around Victoria's upper arm with professional but firm pressure. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Victoria's eyes never left Daniel. He'd already turned back toward the elevators, Jennifer pressed against his side like a parasite. The mistress was everything Victoria wasn't in this moment. Dry, perfectly made up, dripping with jewelry Victoria now recognized as pieces she'd noticed missing from their shared jewelry box over the past 3 months. "Daniel!" Victoria's voice cut through the lobby's ambient noise, not loud but sharp enough to make him pause. "Daniel Montgomery." He glanced back, irritation flickering across his handsome face. The face she'd kissed goodbye that morning. The face that had smiled at her over breakfast while she'd shown him the ultrasound appointment reminder on her phone. "I told you to remove her," Daniel said to the guards, his tone flat. "She's clearly disturbed." Jennifer laughed, a high, tinkling sound that made Victoria's jaw clench. Then the mistress did something that would seal her fate. She walked over, her heels clicking against the marble, and looked Victoria up and down with undisguised contempt. "You should be ashamed," Jennifer hissed. "Harassing a man at his workplace, pretending to be pregnant to trap him." Her hand moved fast. The spit landed on Victoria's left cheek, warm and degrading. The lobby went silent. Victoria didn't move, didn't wipe her face. She simply stared at Jennifer with eyes that had negotiated billion-dollar deals, that had stared down corporate raiders and hostile takeover attempts, that had built an empire from the ashes of her father's failing company. "What's your name?" Victoria asked quietly. Jennifer's smile was poisonous. "Jennifer Lawson, Danny's girlfriend, the woman he actually loves, unlike whatever con you're trying to run." "Jennifer Lawson," Victoria repeated, committing it to memory. Then her gaze shifted to the security guards, Stephen Park and Michael Torres, according to their name tags. "And your names?" Stephen looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, please don't make this harder." "Your names," Victoria repeated, her voice carrying an authority that made both men straighten involuntarily. "Stephen Park, ma'am. This is Michael Torres." "Thank you, Stephen." "Michael." Victoria finally wiped the spit from her face with the back of her hand. "I'm going to leave now, but I want you both to remember this moment. Remember that you followed orders. Remember that you were doing your jobs." Something in her tone made Stephen's face go pale. Michael's hand dropped from her arm. Victoria walked toward the revolving door, her wet shoes squelching against the marble. Behind her, she heard Jennifer's triumphant laugh, heard Daniel say something about crazy women, heard the lobby return to its normal, bustling rhythm. The rain swallowed her immediately. The storm had intensified, turning the streets into rivers. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, water streaming down her face, her hand protective over her belly where her babies, their babies, kicked and turned. She pulled out her phone. Water dropped on the screen, but it was designed for this. Everything in Victoria's life was designed for contingencies, for disasters, for moments when the mask had to come off. She dialed a number she hadn't used in 3 years. Marcus Richardson, the voice answered on the first ring. Marcus, it's Victoria. A pause. Victoria, what's wrong? You sound... I need you to listen very carefully, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the storm. I'm standing outside Sterling Heights. My husband just had security throw me out of my own building. His mistress spit in my face, and I'm done hiding. Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried barely restrained fury. What do you need? Conference room A, top floor, 1 hour. I want the full board. I want legal. I want HR. And Marcus? I want every single piece of documentation on Daniel Montgomery's employment, his division's performance, his expense reports, his communication logs, everything. Consider it done. Marcus hesitated. Victoria, are you safe? Do you need... I need a car. I need dry clothes. And I need people to understand that the Queen just returned to her chessboard. The line went dead. Victoria stood in the rain for another moment, letting it wash away 3 years of pretense, 3 years of playing small, 3 years of being someone she wasn't. Then she walked to the corner where she knew a car would arrive in less than 5 minutes, because that's what happened when you owned the company. You owned everything, including the corporate car service. 1 hour later, the 60th floor. The conference room on the 60th floor of Sterling Heights Corporation was known internally as the War Room. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides offered panoramic views of the city. The rain still hammered against the glass, but up here it felt different, less like drowning, more like watching the world from Olympus. Victoria stood at the head of the conference table, transformed. She'd changed into one of the power suits she kept in her private office, the office that existed behind an unmarked door, the office that Daniel had walked past hundreds of times without knowing it belonged to his wife. Her hair was pulled back severely. Her makeup was perfect. The woman who'd stood trembling in the lobby was gone. In her place stood Victoria Sterling Chen, CEO and majority shareholder of Sterling Heights Corporation. The board members filed in, their faces showing various degrees of shock. Most of them had never met her in person. She preferred it that way, letting Marcus run the day-to-day while she controlled strategy from the shadows. But every person in this room knew exactly who she was and what she controlled. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice, Victoria began. I'm sure you're wondering why I've called this emergency meeting. Let me be direct. We have a situation involving a senior employee who has created a hostile work environment, engaged in ethical violations, and personally assaulted the CEO of this company. Marcus pushed a stack of folders across the table. Daniel Montgomery, Senior Vice President of Commercial Development, 3 years with the company, married, he paused meaningfully, to our CEO, Victoria Sterling Chen, though he is unaware of her true identity. The room erupted in whispers. Victoria held up her hand. 12 months ago, Daniel began an affair with Jennifer Lawson, a junior associate in the marketing department. Rather than disclose this relationship to HR as required by company policy, they concealed it. 6 months ago, Daniel began using company resources to benefit Ms. Lawson's career. approving her for high-profile projects she wasn't qualified for, padding her expense accounts, and generally engaging in favoritism that crosses the line into embezzlement. She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with expense reports, emails, text messages, a paper trail that Marcus's team had compiled over the past hour with terrifying efficiency. Additionally, Victoria continued, her voice level. 1 hour ago, Daniel Montgomery ordered security to forcibly remove a pregnant woman from the building lobby. That woman was me, his wife, carrying his children. His mistress then physically assaulted me by spitting in my face. The board member closest to Victoria, Sarah Walsh, head of legal, went white. Dear God, Jennifer Lawson is being terminated immediately, Victoria said. Security is escorting her from the building as we speak. Stephen Park and Michael Torres, the 2 guards involved in this afternoon's incident, will receive no disciplinary action. They were following what they believed to be legitimate orders from a senior executive. And Daniel? Marcus asked quietly. Victoria's smile was cold. Daniel is about to receive an education. Flashback 18 months ago. The first time Victoria had suspected something was wrong was subtle. A text message Daniel had quickly dismissed as work stuff. A late night at the office that smelled of perfume that wasn't hers. A distance in his eyes when they made love. She told herself she was being paranoid, that her first marriage had left her damaged, suspicious, unable to trust. Daniel loved her. Daniel was good. Daniel was different. But Victoria hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by ignoring her instincts. She'd started paying attention, not hiring private investigators. That felt like a betrayal too far, but watching, noticing, the way he'd started styling his hair differently, the new cologne, the gym membership he suddenly took seriously. And then, 6 months ago, she'd found the receipt, tucked in his jacket pocket from a jewelry store she didn't recognize, for a necklace that had never appeared around her neck. Victoria had stared at that receipt for an hour, sitting in their bedroom while Daniel showered, her hands shaking. She could have confronted him then, could have ended it, could have revealed everything and watched his world implode. Instead, she'd taken a photo of the receipt and put it back exactly where she'd found it, because Victoria had learned something from her first marriage. Information was power, and power required patience. She'd started documenting everything, the late nights, the mysterious charges, the way he'd started password protecting his phone. She'd had Marcus run quiet audits on Daniel's work, checking for anything that might be legally problematic. She'd waited and watched and prepared, and then 2 months ago she'd gotten pregnant. The timing was both perfect and terrible. Perfect because it proved that despite everything, despite the distance and the lies, Daniel still came to her bed. Terrible because now 2 innocent lives were tangled in the mess. When she'd told him, his reaction had been complicated. Joy, definitely, excitement, but also something else, guilt, panic, she couldn't tell. This is amazing, he'd said, holding her close. We're going to be parents. Are you sure? Victoria had asked, studying his face. This is what you want. With me? Of course, Daniel had replied, but his eyes had slid away from hers. Why would you even ask that? Victoria hadn't answered. She'd simply held him and wondered when exactly the man she'd loved had become a stranger. Present day, Daniel's office. Daniel Montgomery leaned back in his leather chair, Jennifer perched on the edge of his desk, both of them laughing about the crazy homeless woman from earlier. His phone buzzed, a message from his assistant. Conference room A, immediately. Board meeting. Daniel frowned. He wasn't on the board. Why would they need him? What's wrong? Jennifer asked. I have to go upstairs. Some kind of meeting. Jennifer's face fell. But we were going to leave early. You promised we'd go to that restaurant. I know, baby, but this sounds important. He kissed her forehead. Wait in my office. I'll be back soon. The elevator ride to the 60th floor felt longer than usual. Daniel straightened his tie, wondering what this could be about. Maybe a promotion. He'd been killing it in his division, bringing in major clients. Maybe they were finally recognizing his potential. He walked into the conference room with confidence, a smile ready. The smile died when he saw who was sitting at the head of the table. For a moment, Daniel's brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. It was Victoria, but also not Victoria. This woman wore power like a second skin. Her posture was different. Her eyes were different. Everything about her radiated authority and barely controlled fury. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Thank you for joining us. Please sit down." Daniel's legs moved automatically, pulling out a chair. His mind was racing. Why was Victoria here? How did she get into this building, into this room? Why was she sitting at the head of the table like she— No, that was impossible. "Mr. Montgomery," Victoria continued, "do you know who I am?" You're my wife, Victoria, but I don't understand." "Let me help you understand." Victoria stood, walking to the windows. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glittering. "My full name is Victoria Sterling Chen. The Sterling name might sound familiar. It's on the building you're sitting in. My grandfather, William Sterling, founded Sterling Heights Corporation in 1952. My father expanded it into a multi-billion-dollar empire, and when he died 7 years ago, he left it all to me." The room tilted. Daniel gripped the edge of the table. "That's not possible," he whispered. "You're an art consultant. You live in a small apartment. I'm a billionaire who wanted to know if the man I loved actually loved me, or just loved what I could give him." Victoria turned to face him, and Daniel flinched at the look in her eyes. 3 years, Daniel. I gave you 3 years to prove who you really were, and you failed spectacularly. Marcus pushed a folder across the table. "We have evidence of embezzlement, ethical violations, and misuse of company resources. You've been funneling opportunities to your mistress, approving fraudulent expense reports, and generally treating Sterling Heights like your personal piggy bank." "Wait," Daniel's voice cracked. "I can explain." "Explain what?" Victoria's voice was ice. "Explain how you ordered security to throw your 8 months pregnant wife into a rainstorm. Explain how your mistress spit in my face while wearing jewelry stolen from our home. Explain how you've been sleeping with Jennifer Lawson in hotels paid for with company funds." Every word hit like a physical blow. Daniel's face drained of color. "Victoria, please, I made mistakes. I'm sorry, but we can work through this." "No," Victoria said simply. "We can't." Sarah Walsh, the head of legal, cleared her throat. "Mr. Montgomery, you have 2 options. Option 1, we prosecute you for embezzlement and fraud. Given the evidence we've compiled, you're looking at 5 to 7 years in federal prison." Daniel's hands started shaking. "Option 2, Sarah continued, you resign immediately, forfeit all stock options and benefits, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will never work in commercial real estate again. We'll make sure of that. But you'll stay out of prison." "That's not a choice," Daniel gasped. "That's extortion." "No," Victoria said quietly. "That's mercy. More mercy than you showed me when you had your guards put their hands on me. More mercy than you showed our children when you turned your back on their mother." The word children seemed to hit Daniel like a truck. Children. Twins. Victoria's hand moved to her belly. "A boy and a girl. They'll have my last name, not yours. They'll inherit this empire, not you. And they'll never know that their father was a man who valued his mistress more than his family." Tears were streaming down Daniel's face now. "Please, Victoria, please, I love you. I made mistakes, but I love you." "You loved who you thought I was," Victoria corrected. "You loved the idea of a simple wife who would worship you, who would never challenge you, who would let you climb your way to success on your own merits. She paused. But I wasn't that woman. I was always the woman with the power, and you couldn't handle that, could you? Even without knowing it, you needed to feel superior. You needed to find someone who made you feel like a big man. The truth of her words hung in the air. Jennifer has already been escorted from the building, Marcus added. She's been terminated for cause, no severance, and we're considering legal action for the assault on our CEO. Daniel slumped in his chair, broken. What do I tell people? What do I tell my family? That's not my problem, Victoria said. You have until end of business today to clean out your office and sign the resignation papers. Security will escort you out. She nodded to Marcus, who pressed a button. 2 security guards entered, not Stephen and Michael, but 2 others from the evening shift. Daniel stood on shaking legs. As the guards moved to flank him, he looked at Victoria one last time. I really did love you, he whispered. In the beginning. I know, Victoria said, and for the first time her voice cracked slightly. That's what makes this so much worse. The guards led him out. The door closed, and Victoria was left standing at the head of the table, her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's kick. Sarah Walsh approached carefully. Are you all right? No, Victoria admitted, but I will be. 3 months later, epilogue. Victoria stood in the nursery she'd designed herself, not in the small apartment Daniel had known, but in her real home, a penthouse that occupied the top 2 floors of Sterling Heights Corporation. The twins slept peacefully in their cribs, perfect and beautiful in hers. Elena Grace and James William, named after her mother and grandfather. They would grow up knowing their worth, knowing their power, never having to hide who they were to test someone else's love. Marcus had stopped by earlier with the final paperwork. Daniel had signed everything, taken his 6 months of severance. More than he deserved, less than he'd hoped, and disappeared. She'd heard through the grapevine that he'd moved back to his hometown, taken a job at his father's small construction company. Jennifer Lawson had left the city entirely, unable to find work after word spread about what she'd done. Victoria should have felt triumphant, vindicated, powerful. Instead, she just felt tired. Ms. Chen, her assistant David, appeared in the doorway. You have a visitor. She says it's important. Victoria frowned. Who? She says her name is Catherine Montgomery, Daniel's mother. Victoria's first instinct was to refuse. She'd liked Catherine during their brief time as family, but that was before everything. Send her up, Victoria said quietly. Catherine appeared 5 minutes later, looking older than Victoria remembered. The past 3 months had clearly been hard on her too. Thank you for seeing me, Catherine said. Would you like tea? Please. They sat in Victoria's living room, the city sprawling below them. Catherine looked around at the obvious wealth, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows, and something like understanding crossed her face. He really didn't know, Catherine said finally. Did he? No, Victoria confirmed. I made sure of it. Why? Victoria considered the question. My first husband married me for money. I wanted to know if Daniel was different, if love could exist without power dynamics, without wealth complicating everything. And your answer? I still don't know, Victoria admitted. Because Daniel did love me, I think. But he also needed to feel important, needed to be the provider, the successful one. And when his career started taking off, when he thought he was finally becoming the man he wanted to be, he started looking for someone who would admire that without question. Catherine was silent for a long moment. He's been seeing a therapist. Did you know that? Victoria shook her head. He's trying to understand why he did what he did, why he threw away something real for something empty. Catherine's eyes were wet. "He asked me to tell you that he knows he can never make this right, that he knows he destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him. But for what it's worth, he's genuinely sorry." "Thank you for telling me," Victoria said quietly, "but sorry doesn't change anything." "I know." Catherine stood to leave, then paused. "The babies, my grandchildren, will I ever be able to meet them?" Victoria looked toward the nursery, thinking about Elena and James, thinking about the future she was building for them. "Not now," she said finally, "but maybe someday. If you want to be in their lives, it will be on my terms, and it will have nothing to do with Daniel." "I understand." Catherine moved toward the door, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I think what you did, testing him like that, it wasn't wrong. Any man worth having would have loved you whether you were rich or poor. Daniel failed that test, and my son's failure isn't your fault." After Catherine left, Victoria returned to the nursery. She lifted James from his crib, held him close, breathed in that perfect baby smell. "You're going to grow up knowing the truth," she whispered to him. "That love should never require you to be small. That the right person will celebrate your power, not fear it. That you should never, ever have to hide who you are to be worthy of love." James made a small sound, his tiny hand gripping her finger. Through the windows, Victoria could see Sterling Heights Corporation in the distance, its lights glowing in the evening darkness. Her empire, her legacy, her truth. She'd started this journey wanting to know if genuine love could exist in her world. She'd learned that it could, just not with the person she'd hoped. But standing here, holding her son, with her daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Victoria realized something important. She didn't need a man to complete her story. She never had. She was already whole. And that, in the end, was the most powerful revelation of all. The spring sunshine streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Heights Corporation as Victoria Sterling Chen stood before a different kind of board meeting, this one featuring 5-year-old twins who had very strong opinions about the architectural model spread across her office floor. "Mommy, the park needs to be bigger," Elena declared, her dark curls bouncing as she rearranged the miniature trees with the precision of a seasoned urban planner. "People need space to breathe. You always say that." James nodded seriously, adjusting his glasses, so much like Victoria's father in the old photographs. "And the apartments should have big windows, like ours, so families can see the sky." Victoria smiled, crouching down in her tailored suit to join them at floor level. "You're both absolutely right. Marcus, are you getting all this?" Marcus Richardson, now COO and Victoria's most trusted partner, grinned from his seat on her office couch. "Every word, though I'm not sure how to put 'people need to see the sky' in the zoning proposal." "You'll figure it out," Victoria said, ruffling James's hair. "You always do." The Sterling Heights residential project was her most ambitious venture yet, converting an entire block of the city into mixed income, housing with green spaces, community centers, and affordable units alongside luxury penthouses. It was the kind of project that would have been impossible 5 years ago when she was still hiding, still pretending, still trying to be smaller than she was. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Chen, your 3 o'clock is here." Victoria checked her watch. The interview with Forbes, they were doing a profile on her leadership style, her parenting philosophy, and how she'd transformed Sterling Heights into not just a profitable empire, but a force for social good. "David, can you take Elena and James to the employee lounge? I think Chef Marco was making those cookies they love." "Chocolate chip?" Elena's eyes lit up. "With the sea salt," James added hopefully. "Both," Victoria confirmed, kissing each of their foreheads. "I'll come get you in an hour." As the twins scampered out with David, Marcus stood to leave as well. Same time tomorrow to review the proposal? Actually, Victoria said, her tone shifting to something more serious. Stay for a minute, there's something I need to tell you about the interview. Marcus settled back onto the couch, concern flickering across his face. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but Forbes asked if they could include a segment about Daniel. The name still carried weight, even after 5 years. Marcus's expression hardened. What kind of segment? Apparently, he's been doing work in affordable housing development, small projects in his hometown. He's been partnering with a nonprofit that builds homes for families affected by domestic violence. Victoria moved to the windows, looking out at the city she'd helped shape. They want to frame it as a redemption story, the fall and rise of Daniel Montgomery. And how do you feel about that? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to say no, to keep that chapter closed. But another part, she turned to face Marcus. I've spent 5 years building something better, not just in business, but in myself. I've learned that holding on to anger is like holding on to poison. It doesn't hurt the other person, it only hurts me. So you're going to let them write about him? I'm going to tell my truth, Victoria said firmly. What happened, what I learned, how it shaped me into the leader I am today. If that inadvertently helps his redemption narrative, so be it. But I won't lie or minimize what he did just to make it a better story. Marcus nodded slowly. You've come a long way from the woman standing in the rain. We both have. The Forbes interview lasted 90 minutes. The journalist, Amanda Chen, no relation, was sharp, thorough, and refreshingly direct. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Amanda said, her recorder sitting between them. 5 years ago, you revealed your identity in one of the most dramatic ways possible. Your husband had you thrown out of your own building. How do you reflect on that moment now? Victoria took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. That day was simultaneously the worst and best moment of my life. Worst because someone I loved and trusted showed me exactly who he really was. Best because it freed me from a lie I'd been telling myself, that I needed to be smaller, quieter, less powerful to be loved. Do you regret hiding your identity from him? No, Victoria said without hesitation. I regret that it was necessary. I regret living in a world where women with power are seen as intimidating or threatening. But I don't regret testing whether someone could love me for who I am, not what I have. And your children, how do you talk to them about their father? This was the harder question. Victoria's hand instinctively moved to the locket around her neck. Inside were pictures of Elena and James as newborns. I tell them the truth in age-appropriate ways. They know they have a father. They know he made serious mistakes that hurt their mother. They also know that people are complicated, that we all make choices we regret, and that growth and change are possible. She paused. Daniel has requested supervised visitation through lawyers, through therapists, through every proper channel. After 5 years of therapy and demonstrable change in his life, I'm considering it. Amanda's eyebrows rose. Really? After everything? Not for him, Victoria clarified. For them, Elena and James are starting to ask questions, real questions. They see their friends with fathers and wonder about theirs. They deserve the chance to know him, to form their own opinions with appropriate boundaries and protections in place. That's remarkably generous. Victoria smiled slightly. It's remarkably selfish, actually. I refuse to let Daniel's mistakes 5 years ago dictate my children's future or my own healing. Forgiveness isn't about absolving someone else. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying their sins. How does the Daniel Montgomery of today differ from the one who had you removed from the building? You'd have to ask him, Victoria said. "But from what I've observed from a distance, through mutual acquaintances, through the work he's doing, he seems to have become the man I hoped he was when I met him. Someone who serves rather than takes. Someone who builds rather than destroys. Whether that change is genuine or permanent, only time will tell. And if you could go back to that day, standing in the rain, what would you tell yourself?" Victoria's eyes grew distant, remembering. "I'd tell her that the woman she's about to become is stronger than she knows, that the pain is temporary but the lessons are permanent, and that sometimes the worst moments are actually doorways to the best versions of ourselves." After the interview concluded, Victoria collected the twins from the employee lounge. They were covered in chocolate and laughter, playing a board game with 3 junior associates who'd clearly abandoned all pretense of work. "Mommy, can we come to work with you every day?" Elena asked as they rode the elevator down to the parking garage. "Maybe not every day," Victoria laughed, "but whenever you want to see what Mommy does, you're always welcome." "Do you like being the boss?" James asked suddenly, with that serious tone he got when asking questions that really mattered. Victoria crouched down to his eye level. "I like being able to make decisions that help people. I like building things that make the city better. I like knowing that I can take care of you and Elena and make the world a little bit fairer." She touched his cheek. "Being the boss isn't about being in charge of people. It's about being responsible for them. Does that make sense?" James nodded thoughtfully. "Like how you're responsible for us?" "Exactly like that." They drove home as the sun began to set, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. As they passed Sterling Heights Corporation, Elena pointed at the building. "That's ours, right, Mommy?" "That's yours," Victoria corrected gently. "Mine to build now, yours to inherit someday. But only if you want it. You can be anything you want to be. Architects, artists, teachers, astronauts. The building will always be there if you need it, but it doesn't define who you are." "What if we want to be bosses like you?" Elena asked. Victoria smiled. "Then I'll teach you everything I know, but I'll also teach you what I learned the hard way, that power without compassion is tyranny, that wealth without responsibility is waste, and that success without authenticity is just an expensive lie." That evening, after the twins were bathed and tucked into bed, Victoria stood in her home office, reviewing the architectural plans for the residential project. Her phone buzzed, a message from her lawyer, Patricia Sandoval. "Daniel's therapist sent over the evaluation. He's completed the program. Still wants supervised visitation. Your call, but the therapist believes he's genuinely changed. Attached the report." Victoria stared at the message for a long moment, then she opened the attachment. The report was thorough. 30 pages documenting 5 years of therapy, cognitive behavioral work, amends made, consistent employment in service of others. There were letters from the families he'd helped house, from his therapist, from his own parents documenting the change they'd witnessed. One section caught her attention. "Mr. Montgomery has demonstrated sustained insight into the narcissistic patterns that led to his betrayal of his wife and family. He, acknowledges that no amount of changed behavior erases the harm caused. He does not seek reconciliation with Ms. Chen. He recognizes that ship has sailed permanently. His sole focus is on potentially developing an appropriate relationship with his children, should Ms. Chen determine that serves their best interests. It is this evaluator's professional opinion that Mr. Montgomery no longer poses an emotional or psychological threat and has genuinely transformed his value system." Victoria closed the report and walked to the twins' bedroom. She stood in the doorway, watching them sleep. Elena sprawled like a starfish, James curled up with his stuffed lion. They were happy, healthy, whole. Did they need Daniel in their lives? No, they had her. They had Catherine, who visited monthly and had become a doting grandmother. They had Marcus and David and a whole community of people who loved them. But did they deserve the option of knowing their father if he'd truly become someone worthy of knowing? That was a harder question. Victoria returned to her office and picked up her phone. "Patricia, let's set up a preliminary meeting. Just Daniel and me. Neutral location. You present. I want to look him in the eye and see for myself if the change is real. Then I'll decide about the children." The response came quickly. "I'll arrange it. You're doing the right thing." Victoria wasn't sure about that, but she was sure of this. She refused to make decisions based on fear or anger. She'd built an empire on calculated risks and careful assessment. Her children's future deserved the same thoughtful approach. 2 weeks later, Victoria sat in Patricia's conference room waiting. Her hands were steady, her mind clear. She'd dressed carefully, not to impress, but to remind herself who she was: powerful, successful, whole. The door opened. Daniel walked in. He looked different. Older, yes, they both were, but also smaller somehow. Not in a broken way, but in a humbled way. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt. No expensive watch, no designer shoes. Just a man who'd learned, perhaps too late, that the trappings of success meant nothing without substance. Their eyes met. Daniel's filled with tears immediately. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. Patricia sat at the head of the table, a silent witness. "This isn't about you," Victoria said clearly. "This is about Elena and James. They're asking questions about their father. They deserve honest answers." "I know. They deserve better than what you gave me." "I know," Daniel repeated, and a tear spilled down his cheek. "Victoria, I don't have any excuse for what I did. I was selfish, weak, and cruel. I threw away everything that mattered for something that meant nothing. I've spent 5 years trying to understand how I became that person, and working every day to be someone different." "Tell me about the work you're doing." Daniel seemed surprised by the subject change, but he answered, "After everything fell apart, I hit bottom, moved home, worked for my dad, felt sorry for myself. Then I met a woman at a community center. Her name was Ruth. She'd escaped an abusive marriage with her 3 kids. No money, no home, no hope." He paused, collecting himself. "She asked if I knew anything about construction. I did, so I helped her family and the nonprofit get a house built. Then another, then another. It's been 5 years of trying to build for others instead of building for myself. It doesn't erase what I did. Nothing ever will. But it's helped me become someone I don't completely hate when I look in the mirror." "And Jennifer?" Daniel flinched at the name. "I haven't spoken to her since the day we were both fired. Last I heard, she moved to California. I hope she found peace. I hope she learned from it too." He met Victoria's eyes. What I felt for her wasn't love. It was ego. She made me feel important in ways I was too insecure to feel on my own. That's not her fault. It's mine. Victoria studied him for a long moment. "Elena wants to be a city planner. She talks about green spaces and community centers. James wants to make sure everyone has windows to see the sky. They're 5 years old, Daniel, and they already understand that having power means having responsibility to others." "They sound amazing." Daniel's voice broke. "They sound like their mother." "They'll never be like their father was," Victoria said flatly. "I've made sure of that. They're growing up knowing their worth, knowing their power, never having to hide who they are." "Good," Daniel said fiercely. "That's exactly what they deserve. What you deserved. What I failed to give you." Silence filled the room. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I'm going to allow supervised visitation, 1 hour, once a month, at a neutral location with a therapist present. You'll meet them as Daniel, their father. You will not badmouth me, question my parenting, or try to insert yourself into their lives beyond what I allow. If you prove consistent and safe over the next year, we'll reevaluate." Daniel's whole body sagged with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me." Victoria stood, preparing to leave. "Thank Elena and James. This is for them, not for you. You lost the right to my consideration the day you had your guards put their hands on me." "I know." Daniel stood as well. "Victoria, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve the chance you're giving me, but I want you to know what you did, hiding your identity to test me, it wasn't wrong. I failed that test because I deserved to fail it. A better man would have loved you whether you were rich or poor. I wasn't that man. I'm trying to become him now, but it's too late for us. I understand that." Victoria paused at the door. "Daniel, I'm going to tell you something I've learned in the past 5 years. It's never too late to become who you should have been, but becoming that person doesn't erase who you were or undo the damage you caused. Growth is good. Change is good. But accountability means accepting that some doors close permanently because of our choices." "I understand. I hope you do." Victoria opened the door, then glanced back one last time. "Be the father to our children that you weren't capable of being my husband. That's all I ask." "I will," Daniel promised. "Every day for the rest of my life." Victoria left without another word. 6 months later, the first supervised visit happened. Victoria sat in the waiting room of the family therapy center, her heart pounding despite her outward calm. The therapist had prepared Elena and James carefully, explaining that they were going to meet someone important, but that Mommy would be right outside the whole time. When the door opened an hour later, the twins emerged holding hands with each other, not with Daniel. They ran to Victoria immediately. "How was it?" Victoria asked, searching their faces for distress. "He was nice," Elena said carefully. "He told us about building houses for families." "He cried," James added, always the observer. "He said we were beautiful and he was sorry he hadn't been there." "And how do you feel about that?" Victoria asked, the question she'd learned to always ask, the one that made feelings valid rather than dismissed. Elena shrugged. "I don't know him yet. He's like a nice stranger." "That's okay," Victoria assured her. "You don't have to feel anything you don't feel. This is your choice, always." Behind them, Daniel appeared in the doorway with the therapist. His eyes found Victoria's. He mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Victoria nodded once, then gathered her children and left. Over the next year, the visits continued, slowly, carefully, with boundaries that Victoria reinforced like titanium. Daniel showed up every time, consistent, appropriate, focused on the twins rather than his own needs. He never asked about Victoria's life, never tried to push for more time than allowed, never gave gifts that weren't pre-approved. He was, in short, doing the work. And Victoria, she was doing the work too, not of forgiveness. She wasn't sure she'd ever fully forgive what he'd done, but of release, of letting go of the anger that served no purpose except to keep her tethered to the past. She thrived. The Sterling Heights residential project broke ground. She was named one of Fortune's most powerful women. She dated occasionally, carefully, with her eyes wide open, never hiding who she was. Some relationships lasted weeks, some months. None became serious, and that was okay. She had her children, her empire, her purpose. She was complete. On Elena and James's 6th birthday, they had a party at the penthouse. 50 kids, 3 bounce houses, enough sugar to fuel a rocket launch. Catherine came, as she did for every important event. Marcus brought his new fiancée. David gave the twins ridiculously expensive gifts, as always. And in the corner, supervised by a therapist, but present nonetheless, was Daniel. He'd been consistent for a full year. He'd earned the right to attend, though Victoria had made clear he was there as our friend Daniel, rather than claiming the title of father publicly. Elena ran up to him during the party, chocolate cake smeared across her face. "Daniel, did you see the bounce house that looks like a castle?" "I did," Daniel grinned. "Are you the princess?" "No," Elena said seriously. "I'm the architect who designed it. Princesses just live there. Architects create them." Daniel's eyes met Victoria's across the room. In that moment, they shared something unexpected, not love, not forgiveness, but a mutual recognition. This little girl, brilliant and powerful and unafraid, was their greatest collaboration, the only good thing to come from their disaster of a marriage. As the party wound down and children were collected by exhausted parents, Daniel approached Victoria carefully. "Thank you for letting me be here," he said quietly. "You've been consistent," Victoria acknowledged. "That matters. They're incredible kids. You've done an amazing job." "I know." There was no arrogance in Victoria's response, just truth. Daniel smiled slightly. The Victoria I married would have deflected that compliment, would have said, "We've done a good job," or something self-deprecating. "You've changed too." "I stopped apologizing for being powerful," Victoria said. "I stopped making myself small so others could feel big. That's not change. That's returning to who I always was. I wish I'd known her, the real you." "You did know her," Victoria corrected. "You just couldn't handle her. There's a difference." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're right." He paused, then said carefully, "I heard you're being honored at the Urban Development Awards next month for the residential project. You keep tabs on me? I keep tabs on the industry. You just happen to dominate it." There was no bitterness in his voice, just stated fact. "For what it's worth, what you're building, mixed income housing, community spaces, green architecture, it's revolutionary. It's what I wish I'd had the vision and integrity to build." "You're building it now," Victoria pointed out. "On a smaller scale, but you're building it. Because you showed me it was possible. You showed me that success and service aren't mutually exclusive." Daniel shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think they'll ever call me Dad?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "Maybe, if you keep showing up. If you prove that consistency isn't a performance but a permanent change. If you earn it." She met his eyes directly. "But Daniel, understand this. I'll always be their primary parent. I'll always be the one they come to first. You'll never have equal footing in their lives. That's the consequence of your choices 5 years ago. I understand, and that's fair." "It's not about fair," Victoria said. "It's about reality. You can't get back time you didn't take, but you can make the most of the time you have now." "That's what I'm trying to do." Catherine appeared then, Elena on her hip, despite the child's insistence she was too old to be carried. "Victoria, darling, I'm going to take this one home with me for the night. She asked to have a sleepover at Grandma's." "And me," James rushed over. "I want to go too." Victoria laughed. "Are you sure, Catherine? That's a lot of energy for one evening." "Please," Catherine scoffed. "I raised 4 boys and then spent 30 years managing executives. 2 6-year-olds are amateur hour." She glanced at Daniel, her expression softening. "Daniel, walk us down to the car, help with their overnight bags." It was a small gesture, but significant. Catherine was building a bridge between her son and his children, facilitating connection without overstepping Victoria's boundaries. After they'd left, Marcus found Victoria standing at the windows, looking out at the city lights. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm thinking about 5 years ago," Victoria admitted. "Standing in the rain, spit on my face, watching the man I love treat me like garbage." "That was a hard day." "It was the best day," Victoria corrected. Because it forced me to stop hiding. It forced me to claim my power publicly. Everything good in my life now, the projects, the impact, the complete honesty with which I move through the world, none of that would exist if I'd stayed small. Do you think he's really changed? Marcus asked, nodding toward where Daniel had disappeared. I think he's trying to change, whether it sticks long term. Victoria shrugged. That's not my problem to solve. My only job is protecting Elena and James while giving them the chance to know their father if they choose to. And what about you? When do you get your happy ending? Victoria turned to face her friend, her partner, her chosen family. Marcus, this is my happy ending. I have healthy children who are growing up powerful and kind. I have an empire that's changing how we think about urban development. I have purpose, passion, and complete authenticity in every aspect of my life. She smiled. Maybe someday I'll find a partner who can match me, who celebrates rather than fears my strength. But if that never happens, I'm still whole. I'm still happy. I'm still enough. You're more than enough, Marcus said warmly. You're extraordinary. As he left, Victoria remained at the windows. Below, she could see Daniel helping Catherine load the twins into the car. He was gentle with them, patient, attentive. Maybe he really had changed. Maybe he'd become the man she'd hoped he was when they first met. But that man, even if he was real now, wasn't hers. That ship had sailed 5 years ago in a lobby downstairs, when he'd chosen his ego over his family. Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from Elena, already. Mommy, I forgot my stuffed rabbit. Can Grandma come back for it? Victoria smiled and typed back, I'll bring it down to the car. 2 minutes. She grabbed the worn rabbit from the living room, Elena's constant companion since birth, and headed to the elevator. As she rode down, she caught her reflection in the polished doors. This was who she was. Powerful CEO and devoted mother, billionaire and rabbit deliverer, the woman who'd built an empire and the woman who knew that the real empire was measured in bedtime stories and tucked-in blankets and children who grew up feeling safe and seen. 5 years ago, standing in the rain, she'd lost everything she thought she wanted. Instead, she'd gained everything she actually needed. The elevator doors opened. Victoria stepped out into the lobby, the same lobby where security had grabbed her arms, where Jennifer had spit in her face, where her world had shattered. Now she owned that lobby, owned this building, owned her truth, and she would never, ever be thrown out of her own life again. Elena's face lit up when Victoria appeared at the car with the stuffed rabbit. Thank you, Mommy. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Both of you. Victoria kissed each twin through the open window. Be good for Grandma. As the car pulled away, Daniel approached one last time. Victoria, I know I keep saying this, but thank you for this second chance with them. It's not a second chance, Victoria corrected gently. It's a first chance. You never had a real chance with them before. You were too busy destroying their mother. This is your opportunity to be someone new to them. Don't waste it trying to reclaim something that never existed. Daniel absorbed this, nodding slowly. You're right. You're always right. Not always, Victoria said with a slight smile. I was wrong about you for 3 years, but I'm not wrong anymore. She walked back into her building, through the lobby where she'd once been humiliated, into the elevator that carried her up to the empire she'd built from brilliance and broken pieces. The doors closed. Victoria Sterling Chen rose toward home, toward herself, toward a future entirely of her own making, and somewhere in the city below, 2 children carried both her strength and their father's hard-learned lessons forward into a world that would never make them choose between power and love, because their mother had taught them the most important lesson of all. You should never have to hide who you are to be worthy of love, and anyone who asks you to isn't worthy of you.